You're exactly what this room needs tonight. Grayson straightened my collar without asking. His fingers were practiced and certain. I stood still while he adjusted me like a piece he was placing on a board. The event was a private investor dinner, 40 people who measured credibility by proximity. I had attended 6 of these in 8 months. Each time, he introduced me the same way. My name, my age, and a pause that let the room fill in the rest. I wore the dress he selected. I arrived in his car. I sat where he indicated and spoke when the conversation required a second voice. He refilled my glass twice before the main course. He touched my shoulder when he addressed the table. He smiled at me in the way that makes a room believe a man is grounded. I smiled back. I had learned exactly when to do that. After dinner, 2 investors shook his hand longer than necessary. One said he seemed solid. Grayson thanked him and glanced at me. I understood then what I was providing. Not company, confirmation. He drove us home and talked about the follow-up meeting. He never once asked what I thought. I listened. I noted everything. I was already doing the other job he didn't know about. She's temporary. He said it into the phone. I was in the next room, close enough to hear the shape of the conversation, not just the word. No, she's here most nights now. A pause. She's temporary. I did not move. I stood with my hand on the doorframe and let the sentence settle where it needed to. Temporary. He used it without hesitation. Not as an insult, as a classification. Something already accounted for. Something with an end date that did not require discussion. He stepped into the kitchen a moment later, saw me, continued past me to the fridge. No shift in tone, no recalibration. That was how I knew. I poured a glass of water. My hand was steady. That night I lay beside him and replayed the small things I had dismissed. The calls he took outside, the weekends with closed doors, the transfers I had seen in passing and not pursued because I had chosen, each time, not to look. It wasn't the word, it was how easily it fit. I had been choosing not to look for 8 months. He was asleep before midnight. I was still awake at 2. I did not confront him. Confrontation would have cost me everything I still needed to hold. The next morning, I went to work early. I sat at my desk and opened the compliance review system. I told myself I was only checking. By noon, I had found the first transfer. By 4, I had a pattern. By the time I closed my screen and gathered my things, I knew the name, the address, and the duration. 8 years. He had a family, 2 children. I shut down my computer and left the office at the same time I always did. Nothing in my routine changed. That was the first thing I took back. The transfers were consistent. Same account, same cycle. Every 6 weeks without deviation. I pulled the full history. 3 years of allocations moving through a holding structure he had built to look like operational overhead. I had reviewed this account category before and flagged nothing. I had not been looking for a household. I had been looking for irregularities in declared income. The household was not an irregularity. It was the foundation. I cross-referenced the asset registrations, one property in his name, one in a name I did not recognize. Both purchased within the same 18-month window. Both listed under different entities that shared one silent director. Her name appeared 9 times across 4 documents. I printed nothing. I saved nothing to a personal drive. I logged every access point correctly and within scope of my review mandate. Everything I touched was legitimate. Everything I found was already there. He had hidden it inside the structure. The structure answered to my office. I closed the review and went home. He was cooking when I arrived. He kissed my cheek and asked about my day. I told him it was routine. He believed me because he always had. That was the last time I let him have that. If you were here when I found the name, you already know where this leads. What you don't know yet is the one document that made all of it his to answer for. Subscribe. The next part is where it becomes undeniable. I saw her on a Tuesday. I was completing a site review on a property flagged in the compliance trace. She was outside the adjacent building with a child on each side. The younger one was holding her hand. The older one was talking. She was composed in the way people are when the life they have chosen costs them something daily. Our eyes met for less than 3 seconds. She did not look away first. Neither did I. No words passed, no acknowledgement that required explanation. But in those 3 seconds, something precise moved between us. She knew who I was. I could see it. She had known about me the way I now knew about her. Her expression did not carry anger. It carried recognition. I understood what staying would make me. I could see it in her posture. In the careful arrangement of a life built around a man who had structured both of us as assets in separate columns. I finished my site notes and walked to my car. I sat for a moment before starting the engine. She had endured it. She had chosen to remain inside the structure he built. I did not judge her. I understood the cost of leaving when someone controls everything around you. I was not going to stay. The compliance review was complete. I filed the report through standard channels. Every entry was accurate. Every flag was documented inside existing oversight protocol. Nothing about it was irregular. That was the point. His business operated on investor trust. Investor trust required clean records. Clean records were validated by my office. His records were not clean. The discrepancies I had documented were not minor. Undisclosed relationships. Misrepresented asset positions. Financial entries that contradicted declared standing. Any external review would surface the same findings. I had not created the inconsistencies. I had only made them visible inside the system that already had authority over them. I submitted the report on a Thursday morning. By Friday afternoon, his firm had received a formal notification requesting clarification on 3 compliance categories before the upcoming investor presentation could proceed. He called me at 6. Something came through from your office. I told him I was aware. I told him reviews of this type were routine when large capital presentations were pending. He was quiet for a moment. Can you look into it? I already have, I said. He took that as reassurance. He had always taken my answers as reassurance. The notification stood. The presentation was still scheduled, and every lever he would need to manage the room was now sitting inside a system he did not control. He thought I was still his asset. The position had already reversed. He spent 3 days preparing for the presentation. I watched him organize his materials. Slide decks, property valuations, return projections. He moved through the apartment with the focused energy of a man who believed the outcome was already secured. He asked me twice what I would wear. He confirmed the time I would arrive. He mentioned which investors would be in the room and what each one needed to feel. I listened to all of it. The evening before, he sat across from me at dinner and said I was the most composed person he had ever been with. He said it like a compliment. He meant it as a category. I was composed because I had already made every decision that mattered. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. The gesture was practiced. I had seen it performed in 7 different rooms for 7 different audiences. I did not move my hand. I was thinking about a moment 6 months earlier. He had been on the phone in the kitchen, laughing at something the other person said. The sound was unguarded in a way I had never heard from him with me. It was the laugh of a man at home. He had not been at home. I held that memory without verdict. I did not need it to mean anything additional. It already told me everything that the documents had confirmed. I picked up my fork and finished dinner. The presentation room held 31 people. Grayson stood at the front with the ease of a man who had done this many times. He moved through the slides with precision. Numbers, projections, portfolio history. He was fluent in exactly the language the room needed. I sat in the second row. He had placed me there. Midway through, a senior investor asked a standard disclosure question. Were there any undisclosed conflicts of interest or personal relationships that could affect the integrity of the represented positions? It was a formality. The room expected a clean answer. Grayson looked at me. He looked at me the way he always did when he needed the room to feel something. My presence was the confirmation. My silence was the answer he was counting on. I held his gaze. I can't confirm that. The sentence was quiet, clear, delivered without movement. The room shifted, not loudly. The kind of shift that happens when a load-bearing wall is removed and every person present feels the structure change before they understand why. Grayson's expression did not collapse immediately. It reorganized. The performance held for 3 more seconds before the weight of what I had just said reached his face. One investor turned to his colleague. Another opened a tablet. Grayson stood at the front of the room and understood, for the first time, that he was no longer managing this. The presentation did not continue. 2 investors requested a recess within 4 minutes. One asked to speak with compliance directly. Grayson stood at the front of the room while people moved around him in the way people move when they have already made a decision and are managing the logistics of it. He did not look at me again. I remained in my seat until the room had largely cleared. Then I stood and gathered my things without urgency. A junior associate from one of the investment firms stopped beside me. He asked, quietly, whether the notification filed earlier that week was related to what I had just said. I told him the review was filed through proper channels and the findings were documented. He nodded once and walked away. Grayson was speaking to 2 people near the presentation screen. His voice was controlled, but his hands were not. He was running the same containment pattern I had watched him use in other rooms. Calm language, steady eye contact, strategic softening. It was not working. The investors he had needed to close that evening left without shaking his hand. He found me in the corridor outside. "What did you do?" I looked at him steadily. "My job." His face held the particular stillness of a man who has just understood that the thing he thought he was managing was never under his management at all. The corridor emptied. Grayson stood 4 feet from me with everything he had built that evening sitting in pieces behind him. The investors had left. The deal was suspended. The compliance notification was now a formal inquiry. 3 of the people in that room had already exchanged messages before they reached the elevator. None of this was reversible by morning. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he straightened. "Old habit. I needed you to hold tonight. I know what you needed." He looked at me with the particular frustration of a man who cannot locate the moment he lost control because he never admitted it was possible. "You could have said nothing." "Yes." The word landed without softening. Outside, the air was still. I stood on the pavement and felt the absence of everything I had spent 8 months carrying. No arrangement to maintain. No performance to deliver. No version of myself calibrated to his requirements. I heard him behind me. "Felicity, wait." I stopped. I did not turn. "You were right," I said. "I was temporary." A beat of city noise filled the space between us. "Just not in the way you thought." I walked. He did not follow. The inquiry would run its course. His records would answer for themselves. The structure he had built on undisclosed foundations would be examined by people with full authority to examine it. I had not destroyed him. I had only stopped protecting him. The difference was his to live with. If this stayed with you, subscribe. Some truths don't surface until it's too late.